clear as day. Even though it was years ago, that's how I remember it. I was asked to select one single verse from this week's Torah portion, just one. Typically, when B'nai Mitzvah students begin their learning, they're instructed to select 3 verses on their own from the portion. These are to be textual phrases or ideas that get their interest, that convey an idea or an experience that they will be able to speak about in their Devar Torah or their speech the morning of their Simcha. You've likely heard the finished products of this process: thoughtful speeches asserting hallmarks of Jewish ideals, proclaiming the importance of giving tzedakah, being a good leader, and kindness towards strangers. But this time years ago, things were different. In this case, for this student, I was to choose on behalf of the learner. I looked through the lengthy portion and found the one single verse that seemed perfect for this person and their unconventional path and process towards the Bima. This adolescent was someone who regularly attended our chapel service most Shabbat mornings over the summer leading up to their celebration. They're passionate about being Jewish and express that openly and clearly. How many Bar and Bat Mitzvah students do you know who attend services regularly, much less in the summer? The verse that I selected is not one that opens or closes Parshat Ekev. Rather, it is embedded right in the middle of the portion, but popped out clearly as the right one. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 12 says, "And now, O Israel, what does the Lord God demand of you? Only this: to revere the Lord your God, to walk in God's path, to love God, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and soul." The reason I selected this verse may or may not be obvious to you. At the time, I was looking for a piece of Torah that could reflect an individual's path and not one that was conventional. I was avoiding the often troubling and difficult messages about ritual specificity or curses. But what recently struck me all these years later was how this verse, this single verse, this piece of Torah, this teaching, this tiny treasure, beautifully affirms each and every one of us in our innate abilities to be in relationship with God just as we are, where we are now. I know, it sounds simple, maybe overly so, but it is a powerful message. Anyone who has ever engaged in a Jewish text study or serious study of Jewish tradition can vouch that our tradition can be thick and overwhelming at times, especially when we open the text and it's staring right back at us in black and white. At times it can be confusing and difficult and even cumbersome. There's lots and loads of rules and prohibitions about a sacrificial system which no longer seems to apply, and there are outdated penalties for crimes and misdemeanors that are now everyday occurrences. As worldly and sophisticated people functioning in high-level careers and organizational work, it has always struck me how many members of our community describe walking into an adult Jewish learning class feeling sometimes daunted and overwhelmed, and then staying away because of fears of inadequacy, lack of knowledge, or experience. This is more common than you can imagine. This single verse has the mighty power to speak to us, to break some of those barriers. This piece of text simply states what it means to be a person of faith, a Jew, and can give us a place to really dig in and begin if and when our faith tradition feels overwhelming or confusing. All that God demands of us is to revere God, walk in God's path, love God, and serve God with all our heart and soul. There is nothing about lighting candles at a certain time of day on a certain day of the week, or wearing a head covering or a shawl, or not eating shellfish. There is nothing about reading Hebrew or studying the Talmud. Nope, none of that is in this verse. Revering God, walking in God's path, loving God, and serving God. The key is to use this text as a directional foundation, and from there unearth and discover how we do those things, and how we do those things as our life continues to unfold and change. The word revere is defined as with regard and deep respect, love, and awe. I like to interpret this as blessing. When we stop before putting something into our mouths to say hamotzi, we revere or regard with deep respect God who brings forth bread from the earth. When we join together in a shehechianu blessing, we show love and awe for God, the source of life and all its blessings. When we see a stunning rainbow in the sky and stop and take notice, we acknowledge the beauty before us and revere its source. One way of revering God means noticing, recognizing, seeing the miracles and blessings that surround us and not taking them for granted. The second piece of our text tells us that God demands that we walk in God's ways. The rabbis teach that Torah is a blueprint of the world, and everything is in it, and we must turn it and turn it and turn it again to reveal its lessons. We can learn how to walk in God's ways through study. God's way is manifest throughout sacred text. God is merciful and forgiving, so too must we be merciful and forgiving. God acts as a loving and compassionate parent, so too we must be loving and compassionate. God demands justice, so too we must demand and fight for justice. The third piece of our verse teaches that we must love God. The ancient rabbis often describe the relationship between the people Israel and God as a marriage. Just like in our own marriages, our own relationships, sometimes it's easy and joyful, at other times more difficult, sometimes even painful. There's no such thing as a love relationship without struggle or adversity. Just like every relationship we engage in, our relationship with God is dynamic. What we hope and pray for is more of the goodness and the happiness to give us strength for the tougher times. But loving God, just like loving a parent, a sibling, a spouse, a friend, means enjoying and treasuring the good times and struggling it out through the tough times. Loving God means feeling passionately about God, even being angry and struggling with God, but always remaining in relationship. The last piece of this verse and this formula of describing what God demands of us is serving God with all our heart and soul. Serving God means caring for God's creation and creatures. Whether it's cleaning up litter from a park or our sidewalks or even around our homes and buildings, we are like Adam and Eve tending the Garden of Eden, and we serve God. When we volunteer at the SPCA or adopt an abandoned or stray animal, we act as servants of God. When we give tzedakah and donate clothing to the Women's Center or shoes, ensuring that they have renewed life for somebody in need, we serve God. The prophetic ideal of being a light unto the nations is very much at the heart and identity of our Reformed Jewish tradition. We are, in essence, members of God's tremendous army, signed up for a life of service to help heal the world and restore it to wholeness. Our acts of tikkun olam, of repairing the world, bind us closer to the divine. So this is what it means to be a Jew, to be a person of faith in the world, to revere the Lord your God, to walk in God's path, to love God, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, to live a life of blessings, of study, love, and service, each in our own beautiful and magical way, no more, no less. Shabbat shalom.